neutrality. It's not copyright, it's not child pornography, it's not any of those really sort of popular topics in Washington. Nonetheless, I think it's also a critical topic that, frankly, has not gotten anywhere near the attention it deserves. And so we have focused on this now for about the last 6 months. Daniel Castro of ITIF taking the lead on producing a report on this. And so Daniel will talk a little bit about why this is important, although I just want to frame it just for 1 minute, and then I'll introduce our two speakers, and we'll get going. But this is important because at the end of the day, as we've raised productivity in manufacturing significantly, and agriculture and mining, and sort of all of those kind of sectors that for a long, long time employed a lot of people, if we're going to continue to raise productivity in the U.S., and the only way we can raise our standard of living is to raise productivity, we have to do that principally in the services sector. And that will require us embracing a whole set of technologies in the service sector to raise productivity in things like retail and travel, financial services, a whole set of other things. And a big portion of that's going to end up being self-service. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the last point I would make would be, one response to this might be, well, those are interesting technologies and interesting developments that will occur in the marketplace. Why do this at a policy think tank? Why not do that at maybe the Yankee Group or McKinsey or somebody? You know, isn't this just a business issue? Certainly, much of this will be driven by the business sector, both on the technology developer side and the adoption side. But there are actually a host of policy issues which we'll get into. Two main buckets of those being one, resistance. There has long been resistance to new technology, and we've already seen that last year in California, where there was a bill that was introduced in the California legislature that would have put a severe damper on self-checkout in grocery stores. I don't know how many of you self-checkout at grocery stores. I do, most of the time. Most of them buying like a cart full. And it's pretty good, but there were interest groups, shall we say, in California that didn't like that, and they tried to pass a bill, which luckily was not passed, but I understand maybe coming up for again in this session. So there's a whole set of issues around how do we make sure that we don't pass laws, and we have many on the books that Steve will talk about that already limit self-service. We need to make sure we don't put any more on and get rid of the ones we have. And secondly, there are a whole set of proactive things that government can do, whether it's particularly the provision of government services through self-service, and Daniel will talk about that as well. So the format this morning, we'll start off with Daniel to talk about the report and the findings. I'll talk a little bit about it at the end, just very briefly, about the opposition and what that's like, and what are the some of the complaints made against it, and whether faulty and misguided, and then we'll turn it over to Steve. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and all. I think we actually may have a pretty interesting video also. Again, I apologize ahead of time. I have to leave for a lunch speech I have to give. I have to leave a little bit early. So I'll start with Daniel Castro. Daniel is a senior analyst here at ITIF. His focus is on IT policy issues. Before coming to ITIF, he was a he was an IT analyst at GAO, and dealt with a whole set of IT issues there in the federal government. And before that, was a visiting scientist at the Software Engineering Institute at Pittsburgh, at Carnegie Mellon, where he has a Master's of Science in Computer Science. Steve Del Bianco is the Executive Director of NetChoice, and Steve and I have had a long, great relationship fighting these middlemen who oppose e-commerce and try to hurt American consumers. And Steve really is the leading voice on that now in the country. NetChoice is a group that focuses on, as the name implies, giving consumers the freedom and the choice to be able to do things online. Before joining NetChoice, he was the founder and president of Financial Dynamics, which is an IT consulting firm, and he sold the business in 1997, and now is living the life of Riley as a policy analyst, which is, I think, his major goal in life when he was growing up, and which was an opportunity to do that. He has a degree in engineering and economics from Penn, and an MBA also from Wharton. So with that, Dan, you want to start us off?
thanks, Rob. I apologize for my voice. I'm kind of losing this. The report that we released today is called Embracing the Self-Service Economy. And by self-service, we're really talking about consumers that are using technology to take on roles and responsibilities necessary for the delivery of a service, especially those that were previously done by a service worker. And in this report, we talk about 4 key technologies or 4 channels that are used to deliver self-service: kiosk, the internet, mobile devices, and the telephone. And we see this everywhere. This morning I flew in from Atlanta, and I think I counted at least 5 times where I used self-service. I stopped and used the self-service gas station to put gas in my car. I parked at the airport and used self-park and got a ticket from an automated ticket machine. I checked in at a kiosk at the airport. I used my smart card on the metro to ride into town. And then, I pushed the button in the elevator to come up to the 6th floor. And all of these are things that, we used to have somebody doing this job for you. So, what I want to do today is talk about or answer 3 questions. Why is self-service important? How is self-service technology being used today? And then get into the recommendations of what should everyone be doing. So why is self-service technology important? There's benefits for consumers, there's benefits for organizations and businesses, and there's benefits for the economy. For consumers, it's kind of the 3 C's: cost, convenience, and control. Whenever you're using self-service technology, you generally see a lot of savings. Banks that you use that are self-service, like ING Direct, if they're banking only online, they generally have better rates and lower fees than your retail banks. When you go and use self-service gas stations, those are always cheaper than the full-service gas stations. Tomorrow is tax day. You filed your taxes online using online tax preparation software. That's a lot cheaper than paying a tax accountant to do the taxes for you. There's the convenience factor. Anyone who's ever used an ATM knows that it's great to be able to access your money whenever you want. Newer ATMs, you can make deposits at them, so you have 24/7 access to deposits and other banking services. You can use your mobile phone to shop online. And of course, self-checkout registers are great because they make the lines go so much faster. And there's the control issue. I think this issue is very important because a lot of self-service technology is driven by consumer demand. Consumers actually want more control over their purchases, more control over their service interactions. So for example, some consumers prefer not to be rushed, so they like checking out with self-checkout. Some people prefer the privacy of transactions, that's why they shop online. Other people like to use multilingual interfaces. Maybe English isn't their first language, so they prefer to use a kiosk and talk to them in another language or shop online. And then there's the benefits to organizations. Most of this are increases in productivity. Most businesses right now, if you look kind of at the history of using IT in business, they've invested in using IT to increase back office productivity. And only now we're seeing them investing in it to increase front office productivity. There's really this changing perception out there among businesses that when they look at their workforce, it's not made up of just their employees, it's also made up of their customers. So just as they would give you tools to make their employees more efficient, they need to give these same tools to their customers. And many organizations actually use self-service technology to free up their workers to do higher value work. You see this again and again. So for example, at Home Depot, when they rolled out self-checkout, they didn't get rid of their employees, instead they transitioned them to sales roles and customer service roles. Similarly in healthcare, one big opportunity to use self-service technology is to get nurses that are right now doing administrative paperwork out of those kind of basic duties and getting them into caring for patients. And then there's the benefits to the economy, and this is what Rob's going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But our major finding from the report is that if self-service technology were more widely deployed, it would contribute about $130 billion more to the U.S. economy. And really, when you look at the numbers, it's repeated again and again. At banks, the average cost of an online transaction is only 20 cents, compared to around $4.25 a transaction at a branch location. At airports, the cost of checking in a passenger is around $3 with an agent versus only 14 cents with a kiosk. And companies that use self-service to enroll employees into HR benefits, you see huge savings. It's about $30 in terms of the total employee costs to enroll a new employee in HR benefits. It drops to around $5 using self-service technology.
These slides also will be on our website a little later today. So.
Right, especially if you're watching online, you can download it now. So let's talk about how self-service technology is being used today. There's a lot of big ones out there. Most people think of probably the major ones: ATMs, airport check-in, self-checkout, photo kiosks where you can go and print your photos. But there's a lot of specialty kiosks that are being deployed right now too. You have kiosks where you can go and order food. For example, Subway is rolling out kiosks in their stores. You use kiosks for travel, for car rental, for hotel check-in and check-out, to actually get you a key to your hotel room. You use kiosks for vending machines. Vending machines sell everything from iPods to, there's some new vending machines out there where you can customize your own drink at the kiosk. You have rental kiosks like Redbox, which has now really changed the entire movie rental business with their self-service technology business model. You even have reverse vending machines where, traditional vending machines, you put in money and get a product out. The reverse vending machine, you put in a product and get money out. So the common example is Coinstar, where you put in your spare change and you get out a gift card. Or there's a new one called Eco ATM, where you can take your electronic recyclables there, like a cell phone or an iPod, and get it recycled and get money back. There's postal kiosks, where at the U.S. Post Office, you can perform about 85% of transactions at their automated postal center, so you can perform at a full-service counter. And there's healthcare kiosks, and healthcare is really starting to adopt this in various ways. They use it for wayfinding, so the hospital, and it helps patients find where they need to go. They use it to automate routine patient interactions, paying bills, or verifying your insurance. There's also novel applications like Eyesight. Eyesight's a kiosk that's being deployed in places like Walmart. What you do is you go up to the kiosk and it can actually give you a vision test, so it can verify if your prescription has changed. This is a lot cheaper for patients, so they don't know if they need to go to an eye doctor. They can go here, get an exam, and figure out if they actually need to go see an optometrist. We also look at a few other technologies. We look at the internet. There's a lot of online applications for self-service. Of course, the big ones are online banking, e-commerce. You're shopping online. You're doing something that you would usually have required some interaction with a service worker. They use it for online ticketing, for airlines, for trains, movies, theater. Use it for e-learning. People use websites like Mango to go and learn language online rather than learning face-to-face in a language class. You use online services for professional services. You can go online for legal advice. You can use it to buy your insurance instead of using an insurance agent. You can even use it to buy and sell your home using websites like Julia or Zillow or Zip Realty instead of using a full-service broker. A lot of companies are putting customer service online. So you have kind of basic implementations like FedEx or UPS where you can go and find out where your package is. You just have to call in to do this and talk to someone. You also have websites for companies like IKEA that have created complete virtual customer service agents. So IKEA has IKEA Anna up there where you can go onto the website and type in your question and actually engage in a conversation. The British version even uses speech synthesis software so you can actually hear her talk to you. The U.S. Army has done something similar with Sergeant Star, where if you want to find out about what life is like in the military, you can go online to goarmy.com and talk to this kind of virtual Army man.
He yells at you.
He does yell at you. And if you insult him, I think they tell you that they'll track you down. There's also mobile devices. And part of this is using just a smartphone to access the internet. It's another way of accessing what's online already. There's also a lot of interesting applications just for mobile phones. So you can use text messaging to order a pizza. You can use a smartphone as your boarding pass at an airport. You can use smart cards with the Metro, Easy Pass for toll roads. And then mobile payments are huge, and they're really big in Japan and South Korea. My colleague Stephen Azell recently wrote a paper on this about how big mobile payments is. In the U.S., we're starting to see a little bit of this now. You can use RFID, an RFID tag on your phone right now from a company called Elimination to your touching thing. Of course, Visa and MasterCard both have RFID-enabled credit cards that you can use. And then we also talked about telephones. Telephones are kind of an old technology. You don't really think of them as self-service, but because of the advances in technology recently, now we have interactive voice response. So you call into a phone number and you can talk to the computer over the phone instead of just using press 1 for option 1, press 2 for option 2. What this does is it allows you to have automated phone attendants. It allows you to have automated phone directories. You can also use it for customer service. So again, you can allow customers to call in and use their voice over a phone to complete tasks that they want to complete without actually speaking to an agent. A great example of this is Amtrak Julie, the interactive voice response system. That's actually Julie right there in that picture on the right. She's a real person who recorded all of the everything you would hear on the Amtrak system. And what's interesting is Amtrak Julie handles more calls in one day than any customer service agent at Amtrak handles in an entire year. And again, the savings here are huge. The average cost for an American-based telephone agent is around $7.50 per call versus only around 32 cents per call for an automated phone system. So we talked about how great the self-service technology is. Now let's talk about what government can do. We have 3 recommendations. The first one, as Rob alluded to, is that policymakers need to resist and overturn policies to restrict business use of self-service technology. Groups that are threatened by technology routinely push for policies that protect them from this change. We see this again and again. Gas station operators in New Jersey and Oregon have pushed back on efforts to overturn the bans on full-service gas stations, or the bans on self-service gas stations. Car dealers have gotten restrictions placed so you can't buy your cars online. Optometrists have resisted efforts to sell contact lenses online. And OC has some great examples on this. And of course, Rob mentioned the example out there in California right now where grocery store worker unions are pushing to get this legislation in place that would limit self-service checkout at grocery stores. Governments have also been hesitant to put in place discounts for self-service because they fear a backlash. And we saw this actually very recently, a few weeks ago in Massachusetts, where the governor rescinded a $5 surcharge that was put on citizens going to the DMV in person instead of completing their transactions over the phone, online, or by mail. So we need policymakers to really stand up for self-service and put citizens first. We also talked about supporting consumer technologies like broadband, electronic IDs, and mobile payment systems. We really tried to report how the line between the consumer and producer is becoming increasingly blurred. In the past, it was producers who were the ones that were investing in technology. Now it's consumers that are also investing in technology that's being used in the delivery of goods and services. So that's why you need government to support these policies, to give consumers tools that enable self-service. We talked about encouraging greater government use of self-service technology. Consumers increasingly are coming to expect self-service technology, so government needs to do more to provide it. Right now, for example, fewer than 50% of people that apply for Social Security do so online, and relatively few of the post offices actually have these automated postal service kiosks in their stores. We also recommend the policymakers support the creation of a Center of Excellence for Accessible Design for IT-enabled self-service. And what we're talking about here is self-service technology can be used to make services and goods more accessible to people, but that's not always the case. For example, a kiosk might not be accessible to somebody in a wheelchair, or a website might not use the right web standards so that it's accessible by someone who needs to use an accessible web browser. So we recommend that a Center of Excellence be created for accessible design for IT-enabled self-service to really develop some best practices around this area and help teach engineers how to put these principles in the design phase at the very beginning. Our 5th recommendation is to increase the minimum wage in order to boost self-service technology adoption. Really what we want to do is create an economy that favors high-skilled, high-valued labor over low-skilled labor. And in turn, this will encourage more self-service technology adoption. We also talked about in the paper that we could replace the earned income tax credit with a higher minimum wage, because right now, basically what you have is taxpayers that are subsidizing the cost or shielding employers from the cost of employing low-wage labor. Shifting the cost to the firms, we keep the net cost of society the same, but we give firms more incentive to switch to self-service technology and make more efficient use of labor. And then, of course, the last recommendation is that we need to provide stronger safety nets for workers that are adversely affected by technological change. The unfortunate reality is that technological change does impact some workers in some sectors. Even though as a society we're better off, we still right now don't have as many elevator operators and telephone operators as we did 50 years ago. So better safety net policies would emphasize unemployment support, workforce training, better services to assist workers getting back into the job market. The goal should really be to focus on employment security, not job security. And you see this in some other countries like Denmark. So I want to turn it back over to Rob right now. He's going to talk about some of the concerns that are raised with self-service technology.
All right, well, thank you, Daniel. You know, as much as it's kind of to us obvious that these technologies are incredibly innovative, incredibly progressive, and incredibly pro-consumer, there's you know, surprising resistance oftentimes, and maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but it's surprising to us. And there's a wonderful quote by sort of our patron saint economist that we bow down to every morning when we get to work, and that's Joseph Schumpeter. And Schumpeter has a wonderful quote where he says, quote, "The resistance which comes from interest threatened by an innovation in the production process is not likely to die out as long as the capitalist order persists." And that was written in 1946 and is certainly truer today than it has ever been. So there's obviously there's resistance to these technologies, and some of them are simply more kind of consumer concerns. You hear this all the time. I hate self-service. It's just those profit-hungry companies that are making me do the work and they're getting all the benefits. In reality, that might be true a little bit, that sometimes you're doing a tad more work, but the key difference between services and manufacturing is in manufacturing, the production process is separate from the customer, the consumer. So you produce something and then the consumer later consumes it. In service, most of service is co-production. It's being produced while you're doing it. So, you know, if I can get my hair cut without me being there, that would be incredibly efficient. Unfortunately, I have to be there. So I'm sitting there getting my haircut as the haircut barber is doing this too. And we see that obviously in making a reservation with a travel agent. I'm sitting there on the phone while they're doing this work and then maybe. So what oftentimes happens now with self-service is you're cutting the costs by half, or the time by half. You're still spending your time, but the company time, or the organization, because this isn't just companies, this is hospitals, nonprofit organizations, governments, etc. I mean, we have a self-service thing on our website. You want to register for this event, you all registered. You didn't call Amico and, hey Amico, I'd like to come here, can you put my name down? No, you filled out a little form on the web, so that maybe you spent the same amount of time, but we saved a lot of time. The second complaint is that consumers don't get choice anymore, and they're robbed of human contact. There's wonderful, one social critic decries self-service because it's a, quote, sacrifice of our inherent humanity. So I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me that my inherent humanity is tied up with getting on an elevator with an elevator operator. I mean, I don't feel like I lose my humanity when I press the button myself, or when I dial the telephone. We don't dial anymore, do we? We press or talk. But you know, way back when, you had to go through an operator to place your call, and there was an actually somebody told me there's a building in Washington where there still are elevator operators who press the button for you.
Congress.
Pardon?
Supreme Court.
Well, the Supreme Court, but there's an office building, somebody told me. It was one of these, you know, we're going to be high touch, so we think you're incompetent in being able to press a button, but actually press the button. I find that kind of annoying myself. It's like, what number do you want, sir? So anyway, I think if people really want this kind of thing, this kind of personalized service, they can pay for it. You know, there's a reason why I don't have a chauffeur, although maybe I should talk to the board about that, but you know, if I want a chauffeur to drive me around, I can pay for it. I choose to drive myself or ride my bike. So this notion somehow that there's an inherent right to have us being served by a person, I think is just simply an odd notion. But really, at the end of the day, the biggest concern, and certainly the concern now, is around jobs. So in a way, it's a little bit odd, one can say, with unemployment at, what is it now, 9.8%, something around there. Why are we talking about government embracing innovation that potentially could have employment impacts? But this is a long-running concern. It's a wonderful letter a labor union official wrote in the 1930s in the midst of the Depression, and the official had a key way to get out of the Depression, sort of akin to what France did a while back when they had the 30-hour, 5-hour work week, 30-hour work week. Then the union leader said, quote, remove the loading machines from the coal mines, complete all public work with manpower, take the tractor off the farms, go into various industries and remove enough labor-displacing machines to make employment for labor. So at the end of the day, this really is sort of this fundamental view, even though people might not be as crass today as to say that, or even somehow sort of believe that, well, the view somehow is that self-service technology takes away jobs, and if you got rid of it, you would create jobs. And let me just suggest that that view is simply wrong. Both history and scholarly analysis show that that's wrong. When we think about history for a moment, what happened when we had tractors on the farm? Food became cheaper. Individual farm workers might have lost their jobs in the short run, but food became cheaper. People bought more things because they didn't have to spend all their money on food. They went out and bought cars, and we expanded car employment, or they went out and bought TVs, and we expanded TV employment. But even today now, people are saying, well, that's different back then, because there was some growing service sector that people go into. So we automate farms, we automate manufacturing. Now we're automating services. Where will the jobs come from? Robert Scott at the Economic Policy Institute wrote a piece recently where he advocated for essentially going back to full-service gas stations. And he said if states would ban self-service gas, so this is a proposal, economic policy, ban self-service gas. Now, anybody here would enjoy having your own gas, not being able to pump your own gas, and paying a lot more for it? And so he modeled that it would create 3,000 jobs on average per state. I don't dispute his analysis. I'm sure EPI does a good analysis that this is probably the right number. What he forgot to include in that is that in a state where you're now paying, what was it, 20 cents a gallon more or something like that? Well, 20 cents a gallon more for a gallon of gas with full serve. You now are spending, every time you go to the gas station, you're spending less outside the gas station. So your income has gone down, your ability to spend money on things like haircuts or restaurant meals or other things. So while you may gain 3,000 jobs at gas stations, which by the way are not very pleasant jobs, exposure to benzene and other things, you lose 3,000 jobs in other parts of your economy. So you don't gain any jobs by doing that. So this view essentially that somehow self-service technology simply that it destroys jobs is simply wrong. So for example, let me read you a quote by the Federal Reserve Bank recently, a study that some economists at the Fed did. And they said, quote, productivity grew noticeably faster than usual in the late 1990s, while the unemployment rate fell to levels not seen in more than 3 decades. This inverse relationship can also be seen on other occasions in the post-war period and leads one to wonder whether there's a causal link between them. The empirical evidence presented here in this study shows that a positive technology shock leads to a reduction in the unemployment rate that persists for several years. So in other words, there are a whole number of scholarly studies, including the Fed, including an OECD study that we cite, that suggests that these kinds of technology shocks that drive productivity actually lead to more jobs being created than fewer, because you get into this positive cumulative causation of more consumers having more money, spending that more money, that flows through the economy. So I think at the end of the day, this notion that somehow we want to avoid self-service technology because of a concern for macroeconomic employment is just simply wrong. And I'll leave you with one last anecdote on this. Last Christmas, I was interviewed by a reporter for a major newspaper, and her story when she interviewed me was, I'm doing a story on how we can't afford innovation anymore because we're in a recession, and we just got to have a hiatus on innovation. Let's just stop innovating for a couple of years till we get the jobs back. Then we can go back to that job-destroying innovation. So I spoke with her for about an hour and a half, and I sort of cited a bunch of these studies and sent her the links and explained to her that, at least among most economists, that link is actually the opposite, that more innovation, more productivity leads to more jobs, not less. And to her credit, she actually ended up writing a completely different story, which was how we need more innovation in the recession and not less, so I felt quite good about that. But it suggested to me sort of how deeply held this view is You know, you go over to Europe, and their view of how do you get rid of unemployment is you reduce the work week, or you limit technology. So I think at the end of the day, the reason the U.S. has had the highest productivity growth of any country, any major country in the last 15 years is because we've embraced these technologies, not resisted them. Last point I'll make, and I'll turn over to Steve. If we're going to, the biggest challenge the U.S. economy is going to face over the next 20 to 25 years is largely a demographic one. We, including me, I'm going to be retired in 20 years.
Maybe not.
I hope so.
If you see the data yet.
Okay. I hope I'm going to retire in 20 years. And there's going to be a lot fewer workers per capita, I mean, compared to workers per retirees is going to go up a lot. So there's only one way to avoid the inevitable result of either I'm getting a lot less money or my son's getting a lot less money. There's only two options unless we raise productivity. The only way to deal with this looming demographic crisis, which is going to be worse in Europe and worse in Japan, but certainly very bad here, is we have to raise productivity more. That'll let me go to the south of France on my vacation and still have my son be able to afford 3D television. But if we don't raise the kind of productivity we need through these technologies, we're not going to be able to get there. So with that, we'll hear from Steve. Now that's the kind of slideshow I like.
Exactly. A decade ago, while at Progressive Policy Institute, Rob published a paper that inspired the creation of NetChoice. And that's actually what it looked like a decade ago, too. Revenge of the Disintermediated chronicled the rise of technologies that made the middleman extraneous, which invited what? It invited revenge by those same middlemen. Travel agents, optometrists, real estate agents, auto dealers, even wine wholesalers. Remember all that? It's a great paper. Undertakers. They get you from contacts to caskets, cradle to grave. And actually, NetChoice was formed to knock down those barriers to e-commerce. That's what this is all about, right? Breaking down those barriers. We've been busy for that for 10 years, knocking down barriers, but they just keep popping up. There's new ones every day. So that's part of what the mission is, and I got to tell you that embracing the self-serve economy, this new paper that Dan has just come out with, it picks up right where Rob left off with Revenge of the Disintermediated. Because just like in the Revenge paper, self-service innovation today faces similar barriers because regulators, competitors, and organized labor are more interested in encumbering the self-service economy than embracing the self-service economy. Now, Rob and ITIF frequently talk about productivity that's driven, productivity growth that's driven by IT innovation, and how it contributes, I've heard you say, as much as a point to annual GDP growth from productivity growth. But I sometimes think the real secret to U.S. productivity growth is the prodigious output of policy papers that Rob and his team crank out. They produce more than most small countries, and that probably adds another point to our productivity rate. But self-service will impact productivity by letting your customer do more of the work if they want to. And the question comes up, why would a customer want to do that? Well, IT is the reason, because IT technology brings lower costs, better choices, and more convenience. I mean, before the IT revolution, what was self-service innovation like? I mean, I guess adding a sneeze shield to the salad bar at Denny's was innovation on the self-serve salad bar. But IT changes everything. Rob alluded to this earlier because he talked about, well, how do you capture the benefits of self-service technology? He talked about the time shifting. So let me go to a slide which I can say captures in sort of one word how IT enables self-service to reach new heights of efficiency. Here's a word for you, asynchronicity. Really just means that the customer and the provider personnel don't have to be at the same time, same place, or use the same language. It generates efficiencies and choice and convenience because it separates them in three ways. When I talk about time, let's suppose a customer poses a question to HR or to an online attorney service. The provider's people can respond when it's convenient for them. With respect to place, kiosks are places that are convenient for customers, not for the provider. A mobile phone is always convenient to the customer because it's always in their hand. And language. Think of a customer ordering food in the language that they speak, whether it's on a kiosk, a drive-up, or a phone system, or checkout at Home Depot. You get to select the language when you're checking out. And that may not be a language that any of the providers' people that are at that location even speak, because anything you're saying in that language is going to be translated to the language that the workers can use. I think those three factors of time, place, and language are technology-enabled ways that will vastly improve the attractiveness of self-service, making people more eager to do it and driving down those costs. So I think self-service innovation holds great promise, but I watched in this paper to see if there was any optimistic bubble-type, unrealistic expectations. And I think there might be one up front. Rob talked about this a moment ago, about this gap. You describe how the Social Security Administration estimates productivity growth for the next 20 years. Fewer workers have to carry more retirees. Well, SSA says, and I did the compound annual growth rates from the numbers that Dan quoted in the paper. SSA is saying we need about 2.4% annual productivity growth, compound annual growth rate for 20 years, to maintain both worker incomes and benefits so that Rob's son can have a 3D television. But SSA is currently forecasting only a 1.7% growth. That's the CAGR for the 40% number. Well, that's a big difference. That's a gap of like 0.7%. And I know it's good to suggest that self-serve is going to make up some of that, but the expectations are high and it won't be the only answer. It's a big gap to make up. So let me raise three, what I'll call our quibbles, seemingly insignificant, not rebuttals, but questions about the paper and its conclusions. And I think that what makes them significant is that by oversimplifying things a bit in the paper, we may have missed the opportunity to really understand some of the ways that barriers to self-service innovation are going to confront the innovation we have in mind. The first I'll talk about is real estate brokers on page 30 of the paper. And I feel this one personally, that's me up there in 60 Minutes, was on there two years ago because I had been one of the founders of eRealty.com. And we fit the profile of the story that Dan and Rob have described in the paper. But I have to tell you that the story's not as rosy as we laid it out. Self-service tech innovations have not always had their expected impact on prices, commissions in the case of real estate. And it's usually because business models that are preserved by state licensing schemes. Because it's true that even in the late 1990s when we formed eRealty, buyer-side tools enabled the buyer to find a home on a map, to set up real estate systems to notify them anytime a house came into their price range in the neighborhoods they wanted to look at. They could schedule appointments to visit the house. They could look at cameras that panned through the entire house instead of having to schedule a visit. And they could, of course, get maps to visit the house without bothering either the listing agent or the buying agent. But the co-op commission system that was in place meant that all of these cost-saving innovations went one place. They went right into the agent's pockets. It wasn't shared in any way with the consumers. And that's where the new business model had to come up, because the MLS system, the multiple listing system, realtors will tell you over and over again, it was created for cooperation and compensation among brokers and agents. It has nothing to do with giving you and me more information. That's something that a bunch of innovative realtors, like eRealty.com, we turned it into something that was for the consumer's benefit, to help them to self-serve more of the information. Well, in the late 90s, eRealty was the first one to pioneer this giving of rebates, where some of the commissions were given back to you to induce you to use our services, and we used the self-serve innovation to drive our own costs down. Well, as soon as we started rebating and discounting commissions, it brought the wrath of realtors upon us, and that's why this picture, I look like somebody who just lost a lot of money on eRealty.com. Well, things are improving now, as you say in the paper, Dan, but it took a decade of lobbying the FTC, of lobbying for state law changes, and 8 years of me prodding the Justice Department to sue the National Association of Realtors for antitrust violations. They settled that suit last year, and I do think things are much better today. But remember this, when you talk to a realtor today about listing your home, chances are she's still going to look at you and say, well, that's 6%, sweetie. Rates really haven't come down very much. And it's because of a structural impediment to new entrants and new business models, because the state licenses realtors, and 11 states don't allow you to give rebates to the consumer. Still the case. Turn next to entertainment tickets. I think the paper does a great job describing innovations in self-serve on the acquisition of tickets, but I think it skips the interaction, a key distinction. You can order your ticket online, and that avoids having to be at the same time and place as a Ticketmaster employee. That's the self-service part, I get that. But it's important to distinguish between electronic tickets and the innovation you mentioned called paperless tickets. Electronic tickets would get you into the event using a barcode that you could print at home, bring with you to the event, or give it to a friend or sell it to someone. It's transferable. But a paperless ticket is an instrument recently devised by Ticketmaster that provides access that you're tied to your own photo ID and the credit card you used to buy the ticket. So you can't transfer it, you can't give it away without the cooperation and compensation of the folks who printed it for you, Ticketmaster. There was an article in the Post just last year with a concert where a mom had bought tickets for her teenage daughters for a concert, and she had to come down to Verizon Center and literally show her ID and a credit card to get these tickets, hand them to her daughters, and go home. That's not convenient for the sake of the fan and the event attender. That's really about, well, that's really about a business model that favors the provider of those tickets. And so self-service technology isn't always about empowering users. Sometimes it restricts what the users can do in a way that favors the business. The entertainment industry is anxious to change ticketing and maximize their sales and control that secondary market of ticket resale. And arguments related to convenience are really just sometimes window dressing. Third one I'll talk about is contact lens distribution. 1-800-CONTACT's one of my members up there. An early pioneer in the area of breaking down barriers to e-commerce. You say in your paper that Congress passed this Contact Lens Fairness Act over 10 years ago to give consumers a right to their own, eye prescription. And that's not true. Consumers have always had a right to the prescription information for their own eyeglasses and contacts. The problem was that optometrists weren't giving it to you. They were withholding it when 1-800 would call your optometrist to say, I'd like to verify Brad's prescription so I can ship him these contacts. And the optometrists were proud of the fact that they would delay, defer, and pretty much just ignore those requests for validation, which made it impossible for 1-800 to ship lenses to people. They didn't have a verification. So those tactics were also supplemented by optometrists who prescribed off-brand lenses that they knew weren't even carried at a place like 1-800 or lens discounters. Now, Dan, you mentioned in the paper and your presentation, eyesight.com, right? A new service, a kiosk based for doing an eye exam. I'd also like to show you something with doing regular drug prescriptions without a face-to-face physician visit. I've recently been working on legislation in Utah that's really based on a pilot they did with a company called QuickMed. Now, Utah has created a framework to license remote prescribers, doctors who can prescribe meds, and then to regulate the dispensing pharmacies. And SB 274 was signed by the governor in March. This is out of Utah, a real hotbed of innovation when you think about it. They gave us 1-800-CONTACTS too. Now, this was naturally and expectedly opposed by the National Association of Pharmacy Boards. It was opposed by the Utah Medical Association, because Utah is pretty bold about barriers to e-commerce. Now, QuickMed.com is presently just dispensing drugs for sexual function, hair restoration, and smoking cessation. Just imagine an embarrassed, bald guy smoking in bed. That's pretty much the target market right now. But I think it's going to expand over time, because Utah is trying to proceed through pilot, a little bit at a time, try to overcome this resistance by showing that it's really beneficial to consumers. It's going to be beneficial to some businesses, but not most of them. But it should drive prices down. As a model for mobile technology, I wanted to come right out and agree with your keying on the example of Kenya in the paper, because I was there just last month for the ICANN meeting, and I went on a photo safari where, believe it or not, I had 3G WiMAX on this safari, and no electricity. No electricity. Once a day, they crank up the generator and you can charge your phones and cameras, but 3G WiMAX all the time. Broadband costs in Kenya have fallen by 2 orders of magnitude with the arrival of the undersea cable offshore in the Indian Ocean. And you're right about Kenyans really loving to do mobile payments with their cell phones. They talk and they text all the time while they're driving. But apparently, paying while driving is going to take a little more practice and concentration. It's an awful lot of accidents. Let me turn next to the concerns that you raise. 3 concerns in there. I'm going to differ a little bit with the way you answered them. The first concern was that self-service shifts the work to consumers and only the company benefits. My answer to that is exactly right. That's exactly how it's supposed to happen. A A company is induced to make the investments on innovation because they expect to get the surplus. That's why they do it. Now, what makes it shared with consumers? Only one thing: competition. New entrants, new business models have to be able to enter, take that new surplus, and force prices down. That's the way the system works. So it's a timing thing. We fully expect the benefits to accrue to the producer who made the investments, and they're going to keep that surplus and lessen until competition shows up. It hurts me when I even think about that, because that's exactly what happened at eRealty. Second, talked about the fact that a concern was that self-service eliminates consumer choice and it robs human contact. And I think Rob was right on this. My 17-year-old son tells me that that's what's really so awesome about the asynchronicity of email and texting, that lets him completely avoid human contact. And he loves it. But it really sounds to me like a Luddite lamentation, and if there's real demand for human contact, providers will offer it, as you say in the paper, offered at a premium price. The third is this general notion that eliminates jobs. I love your answer in the paper on that, but how about this for the real answer? It's a good thing that it eliminates jobs, because we're not going to have enough workers anyway. Barry Bluestone, economist at Northeastern University, and Mark Melnick with the Boston Economic Authority, he just published a report called After the Recovery, Help Needed. They're suggesting that when the nation comes out of the current jobs recession, we will begin to see spot shortages in labor markets immediately. And by 2018, shown in this graph, they predict there will be, quote, more jobs than people to fill them. The report says the U.S. will face a $3 trillion gap in lost output because there aren't going to be enough workers to meet the demands. It's all about the demographics. You discussed the demographics from the standpoint of the Social Security Administration numbers as to how many workers, how many retirees each worker has to support. This is asking a different question with respect to the jobs that are demanded and the workers available to fill them. So how do I solve that? Let me click for the quote. This is a quote, Rob. You're going to love this. How do they want to solve it? Bluestone says that we're going to solve it because many older workers will need to continue to work in their current jobs or new ways well past the age of 65. That's why you've got to defer your retirement. Bluestone and Melnick said that we're going to be working till well into our 70s to get that done. Well, maybe the real answer is self-service productivity increases to solve that. Next slide you have here was policy recommendations. You talk about resisting and removing barriers to self-service technologies. To that I say amen. That's my job out there. I want to work on all that. I want to give you a heads up, though, that barriers that we confront are very rarely obvious. They're usually very subtle, and they're often cloaked in the language and rhetoric of public interest, right? It's, for instance, competition prevention is usually disguised as consumer protection. Very clever about that. Now, new rules that are issued will also impair new entrants. And customer acquisition for new entrants is the #1 issue. And that's where I wanted to talk about two potential barriers. Self-service is most effective when it can really target potential users online based on their preferences, their previous search terms, the things they like to see. In other words, tracking of their behavior online enables the company to target a self-serve offering at just the right time for just the right person. And the FTC chairman is seeking some new rules, and he's talking publicly about really being nervous about the amount of information that's gathered on us that's used for targeting ads, and may want to switch the regime from opt-out, which it is today, to opt-in. Well, that would be devastating for a new entrant who's requiring that tracking information to be able to find a target market. Another barrier would be that vendors, once they get a targeted customer to try something, they've got to try to induce a customer to try a service, often with monthly billing, without having a person there to make the relationship feel real. So a lot of times, self-service vendors are relying on trial periods, trial offers. Use it for a month, and we'll start to bill you for it. They rely on these methods to give people a really low-risk way to try a new service. Try before you buy. But legislation this year in both Oregon and Maine would have added brand new restrictions on these automatic renewal agreements and free trial offers. And the bills were targeting all about bad behavior, what criminals were doing in those same spheres. But as usual, if you issue brand new regs, the only companies that follow new regs are the companies that follow the old regs, which are the good actors, legitimate companies. The bad actors will continue to ignore new regs, So all we've done is add regulatory burdens to legitimate companies, when what we ought to be doing is enforcing the laws we have against unfair and deceptive trade practices. Say it with me again. Whenever somebody's asking for new regs, ask them to first see, do they need to enforce the regs they have more vigorously? That is usually sufficient to try to rid some of the bad acts from the system. And new regs rarely solve it. Government support for prosumer technologies, number 2. I get the why you want to do that, but what about the how? I don't really see that in the paper, laying out this government support. Because do we really want government incentives? I participate in some venture capital funds, and I can tell you that venture capitalists, the portfolio managers, they love new ventures that use self-serve distribution models. So money already flows to new businesses that use self-serve. That is to say, the venture money that really matters most. So it might be enough for government to just get out of the way and stop other people from getting in the way. Back to your number 1, right? Preventing the barriers. And I agree with you that we should renew the moratorium to keep broadband less expensive. Number 3 was encouraging greater government use of self-serve. And the paper suggests a new presidential task force. But I think what's key here is to anticipate and disarm barriers that come up. Like, for instance, how do we stiffen the backbone of the next Massachusetts governor who might implement fees in the motor vehicle department and not cave in after a few days? Or maybe the next New Jersey governor who wants to allow self-service gas stations. Frankly, I think that electric cars will make that a moot point long before New Jersey ever gets the backbone to allow self-serve. 4 was creating a center of excellence to design accessible IT services. Well, Rob probably anticipated I wouldn't like that idea. I don't think we want Congress choosing a university to push on innovation. I think it's far better to let either the government or private sector buyers who want accessible technology to specify the features they want and let, not one university, let all universities, let all businesses innovate, compete, and meet the need. So there's nothing that drives innovation like putting out a spec, putting out a contract, a request for quote, where you lay out, I want it to be fully accessible to people that are vision impaired. I want it to be available in 9 languages, on 4 different operating systems, on mobile devices. And watch what happens with the innovation you'll get. Innovation is usually pull from demand, it's not push from a center of excellence. 5 was your notion of increasing labor costs by raising the minimum wage. Well, I don't think we even know how many minimum wage jobs have ever been displaced by self-service technology. Certainly not self-service technology by IT. I suspect that those displaced workers at Home Depot, the Home Depot checkout folks, or the folks at the airline counters who no longer have to give me my ticket, I don't think they were making minimum wage. They were making well above minimum wage. So raising that doesn't do a thing there. However, there are a couple of events, I think, that will raise all labor costs, not just the minimum wage workers. One is new health care coverage mandates. It's part of the legislation Congress passed this year. That's going to raise the cost of all workers. And the second would be the coming labor shortage I talked about earlier from Bluestone's report. If that labor shortage materializes as we come out of this recession, it's going to drive up wages in the supply and demand way. And you talk about helping displaced workers, but nothing's going to help a displaced worker as much as the new labor shortage that's coming up. So overall, Dan, Rob, and Steve, I think it's a great paper, and it's worthy of the legacy of revenge of the disintermediate. I just love to say that. And maybe as you guys were thinking about questions, thought I would play a brief 7-minute video that we've done. Not specifically for this event, for another event that you did. This is a video that my colleague Jonathan Zook did. It was a video for the 25th anniversary of .com, and it's called Man Offline. And should I hit the watch in HD, or would that not work? Can we hear it? How do you want to get it on the audience?
Yeah, this should be good. Hold on, you need to turn it up.
Now the cable's out again, so I'm just perusing the digital buffet.
Well, thank God for the internet. Greatest thing since sliced bread, huh?
Sliced bread? Come on, man. The internet is a luxury, not a necessity.
How have you met you? You couldn't last a day without the internet.
But people did function before the invention of the internet, you know. I'm a survivor, dude.
Okay, Mayor Grills, I'll call you tomorrow.
All right, man. Couldn't last a day without the internet. I could last 7 days. Starting right now. My friend. Yellow Pages, day planner, still contains the old gang, portable CD player, complete with headset. Hi, can I get directions from 355 and Montrose, please?
We recommend that people use MapQuest.
That's great, but I was hoping to get them from you now.
If you just go to our MySpace page,
I don't want MySpace. I just want directions from one person to another.
Let me see if I can find someone who knows.
Thank you. Oh, hey, you guys still have books, right? So that's what's so good about sliced bread. I should have known that.
You're putting all of those books back.
Lunchbox, Johnny Quest flashlight, what? This stuff is too good for eBay anyway.
27 million, the bid is at 27 million. Fair warning? So, 27 million. And the next item up 4 billion is a Beanie Baby.
That's Chill, the penguin, yo. Start the bidding and say 50 cents? You want to buy a Slinky?
Piss off.
Can do. No. Wow. It's been so long since I actually sat down to write a letter. It feels good. It feels personal.
Hello, Dave.
Okay, no more Hot Pockets at midnight. Hey, Jed. What you working on? What's this?
You've got mail.
Great.
Don't forget your meeting tomorrow morning.
Good morning, team. Sorry to rouse you so early on a Saturday morning, but thank God for Skype. Let's do a roll call. Los Angeles?
With you, sir.
Chicago?
Yeah, here, sir.
Washington, D.C.?
Right here. Oh, are you eating this?
So how's it going, Survivor Man?
Good, I'm good. I mean, I've had a few issues at work, but who hasn't,
Yeah.
right? I can't expect the internet to solve all of my problems.
Without eHarmony, he wouldn't be getting it all.
Yeah, but I can just take the wisdom and strategy of a website like that and apply it to my real life.
You might want to think about that before you do something drastic.
Does life look good for you right now? Describe your current emotional health. Looking back at your life, describe one particular event that you wish you had handled differently. In a marriage, how would you feel if the woman made significantly more money than the man? How many years have you lived alone? What is the one thing you could start doing today that would most improve the quality of your life? Maybe that's not such a good idea, but most things that we can do online, I really feel like we can do in our actual lives. Right? Cat Wrangler 66 has entered the room. Age, sex, location? Wrong room? I did not think it was going to be this hard. I don't think I'm going to make it. Is this girl interested in me? Digits on a napkin, that's old school. Hey!
You look like you needed a friend.
Yes! This is exactly what I needed to get me through this. You have got to be kidding me. Okay, so I didn't make the 7 days, but I did learn a valuable lesson. What's the point in going without something if it makes your life happier? I mean, it's like going without croissants or kung fu movies. Okay, sure, the internet isn't as important as oxygen or sunshine, but isn't happiness? I wonder how long I could go without oxygen.
See the connection with the self-service theme? It's a look at life without self-service options like library research, getting driving directions, online options, chat, and even dating.
Thank you, Steve. And now we're going to open it up for questions. And Miko, if you just say your name and your affiliation for your question.
Brian Kay and CCIA. Two things I'd like to address that I don't think were sufficiently mentioned. And that is, one is numbers. This is, self-service is an activity that's very difficult to get numbers for because it basically takes away what has been economic activity in the past and replaces it with something that's done voluntarily on the customer side or that cuts cost on the vendor side. And if you really want to make a policy case for something like this, you've got a problem that you've got a disappearing economy here, and how do you translate that into policy recommendations effectively? Second is the problem of quality. There's some relationship here because quality also raises measurement problems. But I wanted to focus on the negative aspects of quality, which I didn't think were sufficiently addressed. You can think about this in terms of the design. It's not just accessibility, but it's damn poor design. And particularly with audio things, which feels like it's wasting my time. And there's a difference in the business context between trying to bring a customer on and just trying to minimize support costs. I had a terrible experience with a tax software package just yesterday.
Bad timing.
I won't name the name, but its logo was up there. And it sucked me in to making a payment for a state tax filing. And then it came back and said, well, we haven't finished your return after all. And there are all these questions. It boosted the tax back up. It resurrected errors, which I had gotten rid of through overwriting. And I'll never use that tax package again. I'm going to an accountant next year. Is it possible to address the general quality problem through some kind of standards? And sure, this could be done collectively, but you've got a huge coordination problem. It hasn't been done. And so this is somewhat similar to the accessibility problem, except that it's a bigger problem. It's good design.
I'll start off, and I think Steve wants to respond as well. So I'll start with the first part of your question, quantity. How do you measure self-service? How do you measure the impact that it has? There's a couple different ways. One way that we try and do it in the paper, and part of the way we come up with our estimate, is by looking to see how much is being spent in certain sectors on employees that where their activities can be replaced by self-service technology. And what you see is, and that was one of the reasons I put up that slide that had the amount of savings you see from various technologies. So the amount of savings you see when you file electronically, the amount of savings you see when you use self-service for HR. You see that the savings is usually really high. I mean, you're talking 80 to 90% or higher. And that's the full cost. It's the full cost of getting the technology out there and deploying it versus the cost of having someone do it. So what you do is you can actually go out there and measure and see where self-service is having an impact, and you can see how much of the economy it's affecting. And you know that these are savings because this is money that's being spent right now. And as we talked about before, and as Rob mentioned, what you do is when you're not spending that money on, when the company is saving this money and they don't have to spend it on these employees, they can invest it in other areas.
I understand the business context.
Right.
How do you translate what's going on there into national accounts or policy decisions?
In what specific way? I guess I don't follow your question.
Well, how do we reflect it? We figured out how to reflect improvements in computer quality through Donitz in the national accounts. And how do we address what's going on with self-service, which is somewhat similar?
And Brian, you asked about the quantity and the numbers and how government would reflect that. And frankly, self-service is driven by companies making investments, and it either works or not based on whether consumers like it. Do the dogs like the dog food? And there are your numbers. Your numbers would be the number of people that are embracing the maps, the directions, the self-service technologies. Now, what are the implications for government? I don't believe any government policy is necessary other than to get out of the way and to minimize barriers that would artificially suppress that innovation and the adoption. So I don't know that, Dan may have called for a few subtle elements of government being proactive to promote, but certainly nothing coming from my side would have said the government needs to do anything to promote this. So if it's a matter of simply measuring and reporting, that's a huge challenge. But as far as government policies, I think it's better to get out of the way. The second half of your question had to do with quality standards and whether there should be some government perhaps or bureau-imposed standards of quality for things like tax software. And frankly, the answer to that is also self-serve. One of the greatest self-serve marketplaces is on ratings, product ratings and reviews. And if that's really working the way it's supposed to work, this software should have a lot of reviews from folks who had the same experience you did, where it prematurely calls for a payment before it's finished running through the different machinations of the software. So did you, for instance, check all the reviews on the software before you decided to pick this one? It might even be the industry leader.
I used it for 15 years.
For 15 years, so you relied on previous experience too. But I would hope that you'll flame that software online for free today, and then do it again tomorrow, so your tirade shows up first on the list. And let's make sure that we use this sort of self-service review marketplace to help punish that provider and give incentives for other providers to do better. I think that's going to be more effective than a government standard.
I just want to add on to that for the second part of your question, the quality aspect. I think it does raise an interesting point. I don't think there's as much room for government there, as Steve said. But when you think about self-service, I think one interesting thing about this, first of all, the technology is relatively new. So that is, the customer experience does change over time. Right now, the technology is newer. You do have more problems with it. But compared to a service worker, right, the average service worker, especially frontline employee, doesn't last that long. Maybe they're there 5 years max. So they start off at the very bottom with no skills, no training, and they get up there at the end of the 5 years. Maybe they're a really good employee. Right? Self-service technology, we're at maybe year zero still, or at the very bottom range. But over time, 10 to 20 years from now, it'll be that much better. It's not that it has to reset itself every 5 years. So I think the long-term outlook on this is very positive, and that's where we want to go. Any other questions?
I'm Brandon Cox with The Choice. And Dan, great paper. Wanted to ask you, in the paper you make a distinction between automation and self-service, and to me it seems like there can be some overlap sometimes, and I was trying to keep it straight. But you know, is automation when you actually make it, you know, when you call and dial in, and say a credit card company, you put your credit card number, then you hit the menu system, and you sometimes ask your social security number. Is that automation or is that self-service? You know, I think a lot of us think that's an unnecessary burden in some ways, because what do you do when you talk to a live person anyway? Oftentimes you just hit 0 and you bypass all that, and they ask you for the same things anyway. But you know, I guess what's the distinction in will more automation actually lead to more self-service down the road, or less perhaps?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's kind of one issue we try and talk about. The distinction isn't always clear. How we try and define it in the paper is when you used to be working with a service worker and now you're doing it yourself. That's self-service. So we make the comparison in a gas station where self-service is pumping your own gas. Automation is replacing a crew of people who are washing the car with an automated car wash. Now, of course, at the automated car wash, you pay yourself. Then that's self-service. So there is a huge overlap there. But again, this actually kind of goes back to what I was saying before to you about how the self-service technology really improves over time, and that's what we see with all technology. So for example, really the reason self-service technology, we use it today, and the reason companies are giving it to their customers is because it's become so easy to use. They wanted to make it easy for their employees to use. And eventually it got so easy for the employees that they said, why don't we just give it to the customers and let them do it? And that's what we're seeing with so much technology. Once you automate it, once you make it easy, once you make it so anybody can use it, then it's like, why do we pay an employee to do this when the customer can do it just as well?
And Brandon, if I could suggest that, I think you hit on it near the end there, where technology innovation will enable a given self-serve business model to vastly improve the customer experience to the point where more of them do it, so it becomes enabling of the technology to take off. It'll drive costs down, and provided there's competition, the lower costs will translate to lower prices. And I think that's where self-serve plus IT automation makes a huge difference. You brought up the 10 keypad. I'm on the telephone doing a voice response system. I said earlier asynchronicity with respect to time. Well, that wasn't asynchronous at all. You had to wait for the menu to say, press 1 for balance, press 2 for this month's check, press 3 for work. Well, that's not asynchronous, that's synchronous. You had to wait till it gave you the option. And while you're listening, not forget if it was the first or the second option by the time you get to number 8. And like you, I've probably worn out the 0 key on my keypads because I couldn't stand those. That was self-serve, but it was synchronous. There was no person involved, but it had time synchronous. The same experience on a website. I'm looking at an online banking page, and I'm not waiting to be sequenced through my options. I pick any option anytime I want on my timing, and there I've made it asynchronous. So web technology, vast improvement over those voice response systems. Both are self-serve, but they're quantum leaps of difference in experience.
Any other questions?
I'm D. Datta from Embassy of India. That means what you want to propose in your this paper, that each of the service cycle has a threshold when it becomes self-service, like because example is a banking, like initially when the banking service started, like certain stage it reached that when it's ripe to become self-service. Is there any theory you're proposing in your total paper?
Can you repeat the end of your question there?
Yeah, like is the, what I'm trying to do, each service has its cycle. So is it there any threshold, like where it becomes a self-service?
That's an interesting question, because you've always had some self-service, or you've always had a role of the customer in any service. So even if you, for example, if you use a tax account for your taxes, you had a role in delivering that service. You brought your receipts and your bank statements, and you answered questions. So you did engage in part of that service, and you were involved in the provision of the service. I don't think we make a specific distinction of where the threshold is for when it becomes self-service. I think what we see is there's usually a point in time when, at least for companies, they're making a decision that says, we want to offer a technology to our customers, and that's the threshold.
The question, the way you posed it, presumes that there's an evolution, a linear evolution in the provision of a service or a market as it moves to self-service. I think it would be more fruitful to view it as something that happens in parallel. It's not linear, it's in parallel. Tax preparation, for example. I enter all of my tax information through a self-serve online service that my tax accountant uses called TaxNote. I do all the work of entering everything. Then I go to his office for a face-to-face meeting where we review, tweak it, try a bunch of options. I ask a bunch of questions I had. So it's a hybrid in parallel. There's some self-serve, but there's still professional service. I'm betting Brian wishes he used it. I'll give you my tax account. So it costs money, but I feel like it saved me money and saved me the anguish. Another parallel. This is a great experience I used with justanswer.com. Sunday morning, I'm having trouble getting the heater running on an old Jeep Cherokee that my son drives. I can't get the heater to work. Well, Sunday morning, I'm not going to go out and try to find a Jeep dealer. I go online, and by searching, I find something called Just Answer. Well, I put a question in on where is the fuse in the fuse block for the heater. And about 15 minutes later, a mechanic from Wisconsin gets on and says, I can answer that. Name your price. He gave me some suggested prices. I picked the middle price, $13. It's worth $13 to fix this. So I offered $13 and he accepted. A couple of minutes later, he gave me a really detailed answer, complete with a PDF of the fuse block diagram. Well, fix that. And it worked. I was thrilled with this. I made a credit card deposit, and they only charged my credit card after I told the service, Just Answer, that I was satisfied. Or not satisfied with the answer, they don't hit my credit card until I probe more questions. So this is some Wisconsin mechanic who's in his bathrobe on a Sunday morning making $13. But this is in parallel to me actually repairing the Jeep, right? I can't repair the Jeep of anything of a significant degree. But in parallel to that mechanic face-to-face interaction, here's a self-serve option. It was self-serve for me, the customer, but it was asynchronous for him. It was self-serve for him as well. He didn't have to be in front of me in real time. He was able to be across the country and answer it when it was convenient to him.
I have a follow-on because I too think that's a very interesting, it's a follow-on to that same point. It's a very interesting question because you've raised a couple of things that drive this decision to be self-serve. There's a technology angle, there's a cost angle, there's a time and cost angle on the consumer side. So is there some sort of an intersection where you do see these things where we might say, okay, well, here's where we really expect to see the changes going forward, you know, and to give us a sense of where that threshold might be?
Well, it is certainly a combination of factors. You know, you do have consumers demanding it in some instances. The more we use it, the more we want it. You want that control over your experience. There's the competitive angle, where once one company does it, now if you want to be competitive, you want to have the same low prices, you have to do it too if you want to offer the same services. I think what we've seen right now is a lot of it at least, has been driven by cost savings, so then that really goes to how much are workers being paid and how much savings can you get out of the technology. That's the low-hanging fruit. That's where airlines did it because they had very expensive employees. This was a very easy way to do it. So going forward, that's part of the reason why we tailored our recommendations the way we did to make labor costs more real to firms, so they really see the impact of what they're paying their workers, so that technology adoption is driven in accordance with what the actual cost of labor is.
And I went to B school, so naturally the answer to every question is a four-quadrant diagram. So it's a four-quadrant diagram, and the bottom axis is potential provider cost savings from low to high. And Daniel's got 6 or 8 graphs in here showing potential cost savings to the provider, replacing that personal interaction to an asynchronous. So low to high on the bottom axis. The vertical axis is the consumer's realized convenience and control. That was the other 2 C's you mentioned. So you have convenience and control from the consumer and provider's cost saving, low to high. Well, naturally, the stuff that we're going to do is where the perceived convenience and control is high, and the cost savings are high. So everything in the upper right-hand quadrant is so right for this, that if it isn't being done, there must be some impediments to it, whether we're waiting for technology to solve it, audible text, or we're trying to eliminate barriers to competition. So the upper right-hand corner of that diagram will happen, and then over time, as you fix the upper right-hand corner, you typically move down into the origin. But often, there's plenty of productivity improvements and growth. You're just focusing on that upper quadrant. Let's put it in the next page.
Are there any other questions? Very well. I appreciate everyone coming out today. Thank you.
Thank you.